Beginnings: the affluent Miller family in Los Angeles. The story begins in the affluent neighborhood of Westwood, Los Angeles, a district renowned for its blend of luxury high-rises, old money estates, and proximity to Beverly Hills, UCLA, and the heart of the city's cultural scene. The main protagonists are the Miller family, whose wealth and standing in local society are matched only by their seemingly perfect domestic life. Stephen Miller, age 67, is a retired real estate developer widely respected for his shrewd business acumen and philanthropic endeavors in LA's elite circles. Born to immigrant parents, Stephen built his company from scratch during the economic booms of the 80s and 90s, a classic rags-to-riches tale often covered in local magazines and once even mentioned in the Los Angeles Times. Unlike many of his peers, Stephen never courted the Hollywood lifestyle, preferring instead to invest quietly, but generously, in apartment buildings, shopping complexes, and a string of small but profitable restaurants across California. His wife, Linda Miller, 64, is the epitome of the gracious Californian matron, once a high school English teacher, later a vibrant fixture in multiple charity organizations. She is known for hosting grand garden parties, art auctions, and wine-tasting charity events at their sprawling villa on Manning Avenue, always ensuring her home radiates warmth, good taste, and a hint of classic old Hollywood glamour. Linda's commitment to both her family and the wider Los Angeles community has earned her the unofficial title of the neighborhood soul. The Millers have two sons, each seeming to inherit different aspects of their parents' personalities. The elder, David Miller, 35, is methodical and disciplined, working as a financial advisor for a major LA investment firm. He is married, lives close by in Santa Monica, and is often described as the model son. Dependable, reserved, and driven. The younger son, Jason Miller, 29, is more enigmatic, a talented pianist who, despite years of private lessons and expensive tutors, never quite found his footing in the world or settled into a clear career. Jason lives part-time at the family home and part-time in a modest apartment in Venice Beach, where he dabbles in day trading, music, and several unfinished business ventures. As a family, the Millers embody the American dream: wealth, stability, and an enviable social network. Their property holdings include luxury condos in downtown LA, a coastal home near Malibu, and timeshares in upscale Tahoe resorts. After decades of tireless work, Stephen and Linda have embraced retirement as an opportunity for exploration and enjoyment: weekend trips to Napa, dinners at the best restaurants, Broadway shows at the Pantages, and exclusive invites to every major charity gala in town. Despite their public visibility and reputation for unity, their private life is tightly guarded. Friends and associates describe the Millers as loving but somewhat formal, maintaining high expectations, especially for their children. Both Stephen and Linda, coming from modest backgrounds, believe discipline, routine, and delayed gratification were the keys to preparing their sons for the real world. Every detail of their lives, schooling, extracurriculars, friendships, was managed with careful deliberation. At the time our story takes place, Stephen and Linda, active and energetic in their early 60s, are enjoying what appears to be the golden years of the American retired couple: comfort, leisure, and peace of mind. Each week usually brings gatherings for afternoon tea with longtime friends, gallery visits, hiking in the Santa Monica Mountains, and leisurely rounds of golf at the Hillcrest Country Club. Their Instagram-worthy travels and glamorous social gatherings are the envy of friends and followers alike. No one could have foreseen how, behind this facade of privilege and harmony, the Millers' tightly wound world would soon unravel, exposing dark undercurrents and hidden resentments, transforming their story from an American dream into a chilling nightmare that would shock a nation. The fateful day when everything changed. It was a crisp Thursday morning in early March 2013, with a gentle breeze rolling off the Pacific and golden California sunlight already flooding the Millers' immaculately landscaped backyard. The citrus trees that lined the Miller estate in Westwood shimmered after the previous evening's rain, and inside, the familiar routines played out as they always had. Few could have suspected that this ordinary day, meant to be just another pleasant chapter in the Millers' storybook life, would be the day everything went dramatically, irrevocably wrong. Stephen and Linda had a full schedule ahead. Stephen, always an early riser, was up before sunrise, savoring the crossword, his French-pressed coffee, and the Wall Street Journal. Linda, meanwhile, spent her morning responding to a flurry of emails from her multiple charity boards, before setting out her favored scarf and selecting a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc for an evening dinner with friends. On the oversized breakfast counter, Stephen absent-mindedly scrolled through news headlines, while Linda finalized a to-do list on her personalized monogrammed notepad, a habit she had kept since her teaching days. Around 9 a.m., David, the elder son, phoned in to check on his parents as he did once a week. He recalled nothing out of the ordinary, a cheery greeting from Linda, a quick rundown of their plans for the day, and a promise to see him for Sunday brunch. Meanwhile, Jason, the younger son, had arrived at the house shortly before, ostensibly to borrow Stephen's golf clubs and pick up some packages. He exchanged sleepy but good-natured banter with his mother in the kitchen, and briefly discussed his latest day trading schemes with Stephen. Perhaps the only unusual thing about that morning was Jason's slightly agitated demeanor. He seemed restless, checking his phone more than usual, glancing out the windows with a nervous tick. Linda brushed it off as the eccentricities of a creative mind, and Stephen, always preoccupied with his own affairs, didn't notice at all. By late morning, Stephen and Linda announced they would be heading out to run errands, some banking in Century City, a stop by a new art gallery opening downtown, and, as Linda noted, possibly a spontaneous drive down the coast if the weather holds. Both dressed in light layers, Stephen in his signature navy sports jacket and khakis, Linda in her soft gray cardigan and pearl earrings. They left a brief handwritten note for the housekeeper about when to expect them back, and reminders for the gardener about the new rose bushes. Around 11:30 a.m., the couple was seen leaving their mansion, arm in arm, smiling, a scene captured by the security camera at the main gate. It was a small but cherished ritual. Stephen would open the Tesla's passenger door for Linda, and she would always tease him about his old-fashioned chivalry. They exchanged a few friendly goodbyes with neighbors walking their dogs and promised to stop by for the community food drive that weekend. It was the last time anyone would see Stephen and Linda Miller in public. Hours passed. Linda missed an afternoon Zoom call for a charity meeting, something entirely out of character. Stephen failed to show up for a casual golfing engagement at Bel Air Country Club. Calls and texts to their cell phones went unanswered, which was odd but not immediately alarming. Perhaps they were on a scenic drive with spotty reception, friends guessed. By sundown, David received a text from Jason. "Have you heard from Mom and Dad? They're not home and I can't reach them." David, who initially suspected miscommunication or a spontaneous getaway, a quirk his parents had always indulged in, tried to reassure his younger brother. Still, he too felt a knot of worry begin to form. This wasn't like their parents. Late that night, as the family home grew eerily quiet, the Millers' absence began to weigh heavily on all who knew them. Appointments were missed. Friends voiced concern. The security team noted that the car had left, but never returned. The following day, their absence was all anyone in their tight-knit social circle could talk about. That single, seemingly ordinary day, marked by the steady pulse of LA's glamour and grace, became a dividing line in Miller family history. There was life before, full of light and predictable patterns, and then life after, defined by unnerving silence and growing dread. Unbeknownst to their friends, family, and neighbors, Stephen and Linda's disappearance would trigger a painstaking investigation and the gradual, unsettling unraveling of a world that once looked unbreakably perfect from the outside. The sons report their parents missing. By the weekend, concern had graduated into palpable anxiety for both Miller brothers. At first, David clung to denial. His parents had always been adventurous, occasionally going off-grid for a night or two on a whim, maybe a spontaneous detour up Highway 1 to Carmel, or a last-minute retreat to their cabin in Lake Arrowhead. But as Friday evening segued into a tense, sleepless Saturday, with calls going directly to voicemail and the home security system showing no signs of their return, dread began to settle in like a heavy fog. David, organized and methodical as ever, began systematically reaching out. He called family friends, neighbors, and every country club, art gallery, and favorite restaurant he knew his parents frequented, each time met with gracious confusion or concern. No one had seen or heard from Stephen or Linda Miller since Thursday morning. Equally alarmed, David's wife, Rachel, called local hospitals and even scanned traffic incident reports. But there was no trace. Something was wrong. Jason, meanwhile, oscillated between agitation and helplessness. He paced anxiously through the echoing halls of the empty family home in Westwood, rereading his mother's quick note to the housekeeper and searching for overlooked clues. He texted old friends, messaged members of his jazz trio, even checked the family's secondary Malibu house, and called the on-site caretaker. Still, nothing. By Sunday morning, the brothers convened at the Miller home. David arriving with a stack of notepaper and his laptop. Jason with frazzled nerves and a visible sense of dread. The siblings, usually so different in temperament, found themselves united by the urgency of the situation. Faced with mounting panic, they combed through the house looking for overlooked details, travel bags that hadn't moved, passports locked in the safe, their mother's prized jewelry resting undisturbed in its drawer. Even Linda's favorite sun hat still hung by the door, a sign she hadn't planned any overnight escape. At 11 a.m. Sunday, after exhausting every reasonable avenue and realizing nothing added up, David made the call to the Los Angeles Police Department's West Division. His voice, usually level and restrained, betrayed his anxiety as he explained the situation to the dispatcher. "My name is David Miller. My parents, Stephen and Linda, are missing. We haven't seen or heard from them since Thursday. This isn't normal. Can you please help us?" Jason added what little he could from his standpoint. Times, last known whereabouts, all the phone numbers he and David had dialed repeatedly with no result. The responding officer, noting the prominence of the Miller family and the potential for foul play, treated the case with immediate gravity, promising an officer would visit the home within the hour. The police arrived before noon. David greeted them with a timeline spreadsheet already composed in Excel, locations, timestamps, and contact lists meticulously detailed. Jason, more disheveled, offered his own explanations, describing the normalcy of that Thursday morning and his parents' expressed plans. Detectives immediately asked about recent behavior and any reasons Stephen and Linda might have had to leave abruptly, voluntarily or otherwise. David and Jason shook their heads. Sure, their parents cherished privacy, but not at the expense of worrying their loved ones, especially given their mother's habit of checking in regardless of where travels took her. When the officers inquired about possible threats, recent disputes or family discord, the brothers were initially at a loss for words. The interview extended over several hours. Police searched the Miller home from top to bottom, taking note of undisturbed possessions and asking if anything was missing. They examined the garage, Stephen's Tesla and Linda's vintage Mercedes still parked, but their parents' phones, according to cell provider pings, had last connected to a tower not far from downtown LA before disappearing completely. Ultimately, a missing persons report was officially filed for both Stephen and Linda Miller that Sunday. The case was immediately escalated due to the Millers' social profile, their unexplained disappearance, and the evidence that they had left behind nearly all personal effects. Next, as part of standard community protocol, the LAPD circulated bulletins with recent photographs to all patrol units and activated the Silver Alert system for missing adults over 60, a step previously reserved for vulnerable individuals at risk of harm. Detectives took copies of the Millers' fingerprints and resorted to checking financial transactions, security footage from their planned stops, and telephone records. Within hours, notifications about the missing couple appeared on neighborhood apps, email lists, and local TV news tickers. Friends and acquaintances shared Facebook posts and Instagram stories. The case had ceased to be just a family's private nightmare. Now, all of Westwood seemed to hold its breath, anxious for news. Through it all, David and Jason remained in the family home, fielding calls, reliving their parents' last conversations, and silently wondering if something truly terrible, something neither of them was prepared to face, had just shattered the foundation of their lives. The search and frustrating lack of clues. In the days following Stephen and Linda Miller's reported disappearance, the Miller residence metamorphosed from a peaceful, well-ordered home into the bustling command center of a desperate campaign. Both sons, once mere participants in their parents' intricate lives, now found themselves thrust into leadership roles neither had ever wanted, orchestrating search efforts, answering a barrage of questions, and fielding the steady parade of squad cars, detectives, and worried neighbors at every hour. The Los Angeles Police Department quickly ramped up their efforts. Crime scene units meticulously swept the Westwood home for signs of struggle, forced entry, or anything that might hint at foul play. Nothing turned up. Drawers remained undisturbed, and all valuables, including Linda's jewelry, rare art, and even Stephen's collection of vintage watches, were accounted for. The unused suitcases and stationary travel documents painted a portrait of sudden, inexplicable absence. It was neither the staged scene of a kidnapping, nor the telltale emptiness of people planning to vanish on their own terms. Meanwhile, detectives canvassed the Millers' quiet street, questioning dog-walking retirees, young families, housekeepers, and delivery drivers. Some neighbors remembered seeing the couple leave together in their car Thursday morning, others only heard the familiar beep of the driveway's security gate. No one recalled anything suspicious. Security camera footage from the gated community confirmed a few glimpses of the Millers driving away, but little more. No indication that anyone had followed, that they were under duress, or that an unknown third party had entered their lives. As Friday rolled into Saturday, David spearheaded an aggressive campaign to widen the net. He commissioned color flyers showcasing recent photos of his affable, silver-haired father beside his always stylish mother, plastering them across Westwood Village, community notice boards, and local cafes. Rachel, David's wife, galvanized friends to share social media posts across Facebook, Twitter, and community next-door groups. Some of Stephen's old business associates offered to hire a private investigator, and tips trickled in. A couple who thought maybe they'd seen Linda at an antique shop on Melrose. Someone who'd possibly chatted with Stephen about property in Malibu, a handful of hopeful but ultimately fruitless leads. Jason, in turn, oscillated between helping with logistics and grieving in private. He and David retraced possible routes, driving from Westwood to the Millers' Malibu house, then down to their favorite Santa Monica bistro, and out to the Malibu Pier. They visited the Millers' other rental properties in downtown LA, and even called on the caretaker at their Lake Arrowhead cabin. Each site greeted them with the same discouraging consistency. No sign of Stephen and Linda, no evidence of a break-in, no messages, nothing out of place or disturbed. Police, for their part, pulled surveillance footage from the couple's last reported stops on their planned Thursday outing, at a Century City bank and a downtown art gallery. Both sets of tapes recorded standard activity. Stephen and Linda exchanged pleasantries with staff, made routine transactions, and smiled for the camera. There was no evidence of anxiety or danger, no strangers lurking in the periphery, but after that, a blank. Detectives checked traffic cameras and the automated license plate readers dotted across Los Angeles' busy avenues. Stephen's Tesla had last pinged a traffic camera en route to downtown mid-morning Thursday. From there, it simply vanished from the city's endless grid of electronic eyes. Bank records provided no new insight. The Millers' accounts had no odd withdrawals, purchases, or attempted access after Thursday afternoon. Credit cards were dormant. The couple's cell phones, which their sons had pinged obsessively, provided only one last data point. Both disconnected from the grid south of the city, almost simultaneously, around lunchtime Thursday. Police scoured parks, highways, shopping centers, and remote laybys in that sector, but found nothing. A growing number of friends and acquaintances reached out offering help or sharing memories, but nothing proved actionable. On Monday, the LAPD assigned a detective specifically to manage media inquiries. News outlets, drawn by the allure of a wealthy family's mysterious disappearance, camped outside the Westwood gates. Their presence yielded still more possible sightings, all quickly ruled out. The Silver Alert, normally reserved for vulnerable seniors, produced a handful of tips. Transient couples spotted along the Pacific Coast Highway, or elderly pairs at distant rest stops. Each false lead only deepened the anxiety pervading the Miller home. Worse still, the investigation ran up against the contradictory reality at the heart of the Millers' lives. Outwardly sociable and generous, they were intensely private about personal matters. They traveled often, and sometimes without warning. The brothers realized how well their parents had insulated themselves from casual scrutiny, and how that privacy now thwarted the very search meant to save them. As the week wore on, the Miller brothers grew haunted by the weight of uncertainty. Their living room, once a sunlit sanctuary, filled with maps, calendars, contact lists, and takeout containers. Each night they replayed phone logs, emails, and the smallest details, searching for meaning in Linda's abrupt missed charity call or Stephen's absence from a weekly lunch group. But every path led to the same confounding void. Not even the Millers' carefully managed fortune could buy a clue. The press speculated, was this a kidnapping, a planned elopement, or something more sinister? But the facts simply refused to cooperate. It was as if Stephen and Linda Miller had stepped out of their meticulously curated lives and into the ether, leaving behind only the echo of unanswered questions in a community holding its collective breath. The media frenzy and the first seeds of doubt. The disappearance of Stephen and Linda Miller did not remain a private affair for long. By the time a full week had passed without a single confirmed sighting, the case had made its way from the local Los Angeles police blotter to the front pages of city newspapers, then to the scrolling banners of regional news channels, and finally to the feverish world of national television coverage. Broadcast vans with towering satellite dishes lined the residential streets of Westwood, their reflective panels catching the California sun as camera crews jostled for space on the sidewalk outside the Miller mansion. Neighbors, once content to wave from their driveways, found themselves wading through throngs of reporters angling for a comment. Every detail of the case, the Millers' social standing, their wealth, their history of charitable giving, became fodder for primetime analysis. It wasn't long before the digital world took up the narrative, amplifying it with the immediacy and intensity only the internet can muster. Within hours of its creation, the Facebook page, Finding Stephen and Linda Miller, set up by Jason Miller, was flooded with comments, tips, wild speculation, and expressions of sympathy. Some users posted photos of elderly couples spotted on highways, others debated theories about the most likely places the Millers could have gone missing. Hashtags like #MillerMystery, #FindLinda and Stephen, and #WestwoodVanishing trended for days on Twitter and Instagram. Frantic friends of Linda coordinated email blast campaigns, while amateur web sleuths combed public records for anything that could shed light on the case. The relative silence from authorities, necessary for a thorough investigation, only fueled the speculation further. People demanded updates, expressed outrage at the lack of answers, and circulated rumors that ranged from logical to outright bizarre. David Miller, the elder son, knew he had little choice but to participate in the public appeal. While always a private and composed individual, he appeared on local television, his face drawn but resolute, urging anyone with information to come forward. He described his parents' routines, highlighted their unlikelihood to disappear voluntarily, and assured the public that the family was fully cooperating with police. Each appearance brought in a fresh wave of tips, most, sadly, leading nowhere, while also exposing David to a relentless commentary on his demeanor. Every word and gesture was scrutinized. Was he genuine or hiding something? Why did he keep glancing at the floor? Was his tone too flat? Alongside the outpouring of support and public collaboration, however, ran a sinister undercurrent. The Miller case became the subject of heated debate in internet forums and, soon, true crime podcasts. Some users began to question the sequence of events, casting doubt on the timeline provided by the brothers. Why had no security footage captured the couple after they left home? How could two prominent figures simply vanish without trace in broad daylight? Anonymous posters dug up property filings, tried to reconstruct family connections, and drew on a patchwork of real information and online gossip. Others pored over Jason Miller's social media posts for hidden clues, reading between the lines for signals of guilt or distress. If public opinion initially rallied around the Miller family, it began to splinter as inconsistencies grew more visible, and one person, in particular, was singled out. Jason, the younger son, managed the online campaigns, appearing in several interviews, often with carefully rehearsed pleas for help and the occasional emotional anecdote about his parents. Yet, Jason's online behavior, in contrast to David's reserved anguish, sometimes seemed off-putting or oddly disconnected. In live videos, he rarely made sustained eye contact. He fidgeted, forced a smile at tense moments, and shifted his story's details, small changes that the online audience caught immediately and replayed in slow motion, frame by frame, on YouTube recaps. In one lengthy Facebook livestream, he even joked awkwardly about his dad's obsession with Tesla Autopilot, which many viewers called tone-deaf. Crowdsourced online sleuths began to scrutinize Jason's digital footprint. Archived tweets, old blog posts, and video clips were resurrected and pulled out of context to construct a collage of possible motive or psychological disturbance. Others zoomed in on a passing comment Jason made about the pressure of living up to family expectations, and from there spun lengthy theories about sibling rivalry, hidden resentment, or secret debts. The lack of any visible grief from Jason in some appearances, his tendency to nervously touch his ear or bounce his knee during studio interviews, became for many proof that something was amiss. One particularly popular Reddit thread, titled "Jason Did It," gained thousands of subscribers in a matter of days, with members dissecting every new interview and hypothesizing about what he might be hiding. Neighbors who once waved to Jason in passing now watched from behind curtained windows as news vans rolled by. Some spoke to reporters describing the Millers as upstanding, if a little private, but always polite and generous. Yet even these recollections were chopped into sound bites, each wary glance or tone of surprise creating more room for conjecture. There were rumors, fanned by social media and picked up by tabloids, about a family feud, or past disagreements over property. An anonymous source even claimed that Jason had been heard arguing with his parents on the phone days before the disappearance. None of these stories had been corroborated, but the mere whiff of scandal was enough to keep the rumor mill churning. The pressure built on the LAPD to hold press conferences and issue frequent statements, even as detectives begged for patience and privacy while leads were chased down. Lieutenant Sharon Ortega, the department spokesperson, became a familiar face on nightly news, navigating tough questions about whether the family's wealth or public status might have made them a target, and fielding not-so-subtle insinuations that the culprit might be closer to home. She repeated again and again that everyone is being treated with care and respect as we evaluate the evidence. Yet each non-committal answer seemed only to spur more questions, and many viewers felt the authorities were carefully sidestepping the issue of whether the investigation was turning inward on the surviving family members. As the headlines multiplied, private investigators were retained by family friends. Discussion of ransom calls resurfaced, though police quickly dismissed the possibility after no credible demands emerged. The Millers' financial records and email logs were pored over by law enforcement and citizen sleuths alike, desperate to find a paper trail that might explain their disappearance. Ironically, the family's famed discretion and security had left a void nearly impossible to fill. There were no hints about enemies, secret affairs, or matters of blackmail, just a quiet, comfortable routine brought suddenly to a halt. Within days, the home itself, once a sanctuary of privacy, became a spectacle. News helicopters hovered overhead, broadcasting live aerial shots of the tranquil estate, its empty driveway and sprawling backyard. Well-intentioned supporters left flowers, cards, and candles at the Millers' front gate. Others came just to snap selfies beside the news vans, or hope for a chance to catch a glimpse of the son who might have done it. The family's quiet Westwood cul-de-sac pulsed with an uneasy energy that had never been there before. With the growing storm of public speculation, old friends and acquaintances were called in for questioning. Even distant relatives on the East Coast found themselves fielding phone calls from eager journalists hoping for a scrap of exclusive information. The case had, as one network anchor put it, captivated a nation because it seemed to prove that no amount of money, privilege, or planning could insulate one from the inexplicable darkness that sometimes slithers just beneath the surface of the American dream. For David and Jason, the glare was relentless. David became increasingly withdrawn, dogged in his efforts to control the narrative and shield his family from the worst of the rumors. Jason, meanwhile, responded with erratic social media posts and occasional rants about the witch hunt, inadvertently giving more fuel to the online mob. Each brother began to suspect that not only was the search for their parents growing more difficult by the day, but that the world was also hunting for a villain within the family itself. As speculation swirled, police quietly widened their scope, paying closer attention to inconsistencies in Jason's timeline, and taking note of the earliest digital breadcrumbs that pointed to secrets still lurking under the surface. Though no evidence had yet been made public, the machinery of the investigation, fueled by dogged detectives, a voracious media, and a suspicious digital generation, was slowly, inexorably, turning inward. The Millers' tragedy was no longer theirs alone. It had become a public mystery, the latest American obsession, and a story that refused to let Westwood sleep peacefully at night. The unraveling of normalcy. Police initiate a criminal investigation. As the public pressure intensified and days stretched into weeks without any meaningful development, the initial narrative of the Millers' disappearance, one of mystery and sorrow, began to evolve. Subtle inconsistencies in timelines, unexplained gaps in digital footprints, and a mounting sense among detectives that something was not quite right forced the investigation into a new phase. Westwood, normally a byword for suburban tranquility, now became ground zero for a wide-ranging criminal probe. It started innocently enough. Jason Miller, the younger son, provided a timeline to detectives of his parents' last known whereabouts. He claimed he saw Stephen and Linda depart for an errand at the bustling Santa Monica Mall late in the morning, and that they'd planned to return by dinner. Police dutifully pulled security footage from every conceivable angle inside the shopping center, but there were no sightings of the couple, no cheerful waves to store clerks, no images of them browsing department stores or cafes. Surveillance from the Millers' own home security system corroborated only the fact that Stephen and Linda had left that morning, but did not show their return. Further, only a single neighbor recalled seeing them drive away, and no one could confirm they'd been seen in the neighborhood afterward. As detectives dug deeper, they noticed irregularities in Jason's account. Under routine questioning, details shifted ever so slightly each time: which route the couple had taken, what Linda was wearing, whether the housekeeper had seen either parent before they left, all details that suddenly became murky. Police ran checks on the Millers' cell phones, piecing together data from towers along presumed routes. Both phones had pinged in a completely different sector of Los Angeles than Jason described, before going dark in rapid succession by midday Thursday. While these technical details were quietly documented, the investigative team grew increasingly focused on the psychological undercurrents of the family's story. Detectives reviewed statements from close friends, employees, and extended family, probing for history of tension or conflict. The Millers' history had always seemed pristine, but a few sources hesitantly admitted that Jason, while creative and charming on the surface, was often described as brooding or unpredictable. Friends noted that recent months had seen a series of tense family disagreements, mostly about finances and Jason's directionless lifestyle. Detectives also began cross-referencing Jason's electronic footprint, social media history, text messages, gaming chat logs, and bank transactions. Tiny but significant anomalies began to emerge. On the afternoon his parents vanished, Jason sent a cryptic text to an old gaming friend: "Things won't ever be normal again, dude." Around the same time, a large Venmo transfer arrived from Jason's account to someone listed simply as KP, triggering investigators' curiosity. Cursory checks on this recipient led to the identity of Kenny Parker, a high school friend of Jason's whose recent financial troubles were well known. As the investigation's lens focused, the Miller family's dynamic became public fodder and no longer just for the press. Jason was brought in repeatedly for further interviews. Police, now treating him as a person of interest, noticed signs of stress: shirt cuffs nervously rolled and unrolled, stories of Thursday's events fragmented and inconsistent. While David participated willingly and meticulously, providing itemized lists of family contacts and schedules, Jason's answers grew increasingly vague. Detectives compared both brothers' statements side by side, highlighting more and more discrepancies. Behind the scenes, investigators built timelines on whiteboards using magnetic tags for every data point: phone pings, ATM transactions, witnesses, surveillance frames. A pattern formed, contradictory to Jason's explanations. The Millers had never visited the Santa Monica Mall. Instead, their phones were active along a stretch of freeways closer to Venice. Statements from employees at the Century City Bank and a downtown art gallery suggested Stephen and Linda had made casual, friendly visits earlier that morning, but had seemed perfectly normal, unhurried, and unaware that anything was amiss. Another troubling detail surfaced. Jason's car was spotted by a traffic camera parked for several hours in an alley near Venice, a location that raised red flags given recent transactions and Parker's known connections in the area. Late-night texts sent from Jason's phone included fragments that, out of context, now seemed more menacing: "Wish I could undo everything, and please forgive me." These were flagged by cybercrime specialists as possibly indicative of guilt. The department's lead detective authorized search warrants for both Jason's Venice apartment and Kenny Parker's residence. Forensic teams scrutinized both properties, collecting trace evidence, computers, cleaning products, and any physical links to the Millers. Simultaneously, financial analysts pored through bank records and recent large withdrawals, questioning why significant amounts were funneled between Jason and Parker on the very day of the disappearance. Throughout, the investigators kept their findings from the press, wary of tipping off potential suspects or fueling further media chaos. Privately, however, tension mounted. Police shared concerns with the district attorney's office and convened with behavioral analysts to build a profile fitting the increasingly suspicious pattern. The broader family, David, Rachel, and extended relatives, were kept informed but shielded from the most troubling discoveries as the department prepared to shift the case from a missing persons incident to an official homicide investigation. The hope of finding Stephen and Linda alive was quietly, reluctantly, beginning to diminish. As community speculation became feverish and digital sleuths picked apart every move Jason made online, new potential witnesses surfaced. A gaming acquaintance who'd chatted with Jason on the day of the disappearance came forward after noticing disturbing, guilt-ridden undertones in their conversation. Another friend recalled seeing Jason at a late-night diner in Venice, agitated and withdrawn the evening after his parents went missing. In response, police ramped up surveillance of Jason and Parker. Unmarked vehicles lingered along side streets, calls were wiretapped with judicial approval, and undercover officers discreetly tailed the two men's movements through Venice and Westwood. At the same time, pressure increased behind closed doors. The LAPD's Major Crimes Unit, previously only loosely involved, now joined the effort as the case graduated into a full-blown criminal inquiry. All work moved in strictest secrecy, with every officer keenly aware that the eyes of the entire city, and soon the country, were watching this case unfold. Rising tensions between the brothers and a turning point in the investigation. The aftermath of their parents' disappearance pushed David and Jason Miller into the harshest spotlight, and the strain between them grew sharper with every passing day. In the early moments after filing the missing persons report, there had been a fragile sense of shared purpose. Both were united by uncertainty and fear. But as the house filled with investigators, neighbors grew wary, and unanswered questions stacked up. Old fractures between the siblings bubbled to the surface, threatening to shatter what was left of their family. David, the older son, took on the role of practical leader. Methodical to a fault, he documented everything: phone logs, the timeline of their parents' last known movements, and all communication with law enforcement. He held frequent briefings at the kitchen table, turning the space into what felt more like a war room than a home. His focus was on results, not emotions. When people came by to express their concern, it was usually David who accepted casseroles at the door and offered updates with a well-practiced composure. But beneath his measured exterior, David's worry calcified into suspicion. He recalled how, before their parents left, his mother had called to confirm plans, something she never failed to do unless something was wrong. Now, every minor inconsistency nagged at him. Why hadn't Jason noticed anything amiss earlier? Why did Jason's story about the last time he saw their parents never quite add up? Jason, in contrast, was increasingly untethered, plagued by guilt, paranoia, and a sense of being under siege, both by the outside world and from within his own family. The media attention overwhelmed him. He found solace only in solitude, hiding away in his room or escaping to Venice Beach when he could. He oscillated between bursts of frantic energy and depressive withdrawal, lashing out at David for being cold or for questioning his version of events. Their arguments became more frequent, sharper, and always seemed to circle back to the basic question neither dared say aloud: could one of them know more than they were admitting? Their interactions grew increasingly transactional. David pored over their father's files and old emails, cross-checking everything Jason did or said, methodically cataloging possible leads. Jason resented the scrutiny. He accused David of treating him like a suspect rather than family, and felt betrayed by the lack of trust. Even seemingly innocent gestures, like asking Jason to join a meeting with detectives, were met with hostility. Within days, the sense of unity dissolved, replaced by mutual suspicion. Sometimes, David would find Jason sitting motionless in the kitchen, staring at the wall or nervously scrolling through social media, reading conspiracy theories about their family and at times himself. Meanwhile, the police investigation was reaching a critical juncture. Detectives had been quietly collecting inconsistencies in Jason's timeline from the beginning. Bits of information, minor at first, began to form a troubling mosaic. Cell tower records contradicted Jason's initial statements about where he'd been the morning his parents vanished. Surveillance cameras in the neighborhood captured his movements, and forensic teams were now re-examining evidence with a focus on determining whether Jason might have had both motive and opportunity. The pressure from the detective team was subtle, but relentless. Shorter interviews became in-depth interrogations. Informal chats over coffee turned into scripted quanda sessions, with every pause, every fidget scrutinized and noted. David's doubts were reinforced when the police began looping him into more discussions, seeking his impressions of his brother's temperament and past conflicts in the family. He recalled heated financial disputes between Jason and their parents, arguments over money, frustration with their expectations, and a recent fight about selling the Venice Beach apartment. To David, these memories now seemed colored with a hindsight that was impossible to ignore. He began to quietly cooperate with law enforcement, forwarding emails and text exchanges he thought were relevant and never sharing this cooperation with Jason. This secret alliance with the police only drove the wedge between the brothers deeper. By the end of that crucial week, their relationship had devolved into tense silence punctuated by occasional explosive arguments. Jason felt hunted. David, meanwhile, felt a growing responsibility, not just to his missing parents but to the truth, whatever it might cost. It was during one heated exchange, as a detective observed discreetly from the hallway, that Jason flinched when David accused him of knowing more than you will admit. The turning point in the investigation coincided with a tip from the public. A former gaming friend of Jason's recognized his unusual, agitated online behavior and told police about odd late-night messages Jason had sent in the days leading up to the disappearance. This was all detectives needed to petition for broader electronic surveillance and to dive deeper into Jason's financial activity. Quickly, inconsistencies compiled by both family and authorities converged on a single truth. The case was now less about finding missing persons and more about solving a possible crime. At the center of it all stood two brothers, each fiercely alone, orbiting the black hole left in their once perfect family. As the walls closed in, it became clear that something had irrevocably shifted, not just in the investigation but in the very heart of the Miller family itself. New evidence emerges thanks to online communities and friends. In the weeks following the Millers' disappearance, the intensity of the case in the public sphere only continued to climb. By now, the case had become a virtual sensation. Hashtags, Reddit threads, and dedicated Facebook groups churned day and night as amateur sleuths dissected every available clue. Initially, many of the tips coming in through social media were of little use, vague sightings, theories ranging from secret affairs to organized crime, but hidden among the noise, some remarks from Jason's online friends began to attract legitimate police attention. One of the first significant breaks came courtesy of an online gaming community where Jason had been a regular participant over the years. Several of Jason's peers, many of whom had never even met him in person, noticed an abrupt change in his demeanor both before and after the news of his parents' disappearance broke. What was once casual banter about music, cryptocurrency, and video games began morphing into anxious, erratic, late-night monologues. Jason would log in at odd hours, leaving cryptic messages in group chats. You ever feel like nothing matters anymore? Or, some things you can't undo, no matter how much you want to. At the time, his online friends chalked it up to stress or family trouble, but after learning about the investigation, they realized the timing was deeply suspicious. A few of these individuals decided to reach out to the authorities. They compiled screenshots and timestamps, submitting records of Jason's increasingly worrisome activity. One member of the group privately shared with police that Jason, in the midst of a long private message chain, had confessed he was being crushed by guilt, and that he wished he could take something back, but it was already too late. The authorities treated this seriously, immediately flagging it for a behavioral analyst attached to the case. Investigators now saw an undeniable link between Jason's unraveling composure and the timeline of the Millers' disappearance. Meanwhile, the online world's relentless search for answers also unearthed crucial new testimony from within the extended Miller social circle. A cousin, who at first hesitated to get involved, ultimately approached detectives with an unsettling revelation. He had received a series of fragmented, emotionally charged texts from Jason in the aftermath of the disappearance. While none of the messages included an outright confession, the cousin was left with the chilling impression that Jason was on the edge of a breakdown. Phrases like, "I messed up so bad and can't face David or anyone else," were enough for investigators to request a formal interview with him. As these fresh leads came in, police set up a dedicated task force to mine for additional digital evidence. They combed through Jason's online chats, his social media posts, and even interactions in lesser-known forums, piecing together a cohesive picture of his state of mind during the weeks in question. Cybercrime specialists worked around the clock to recover deleted messages and follow IP trails that often led to late-night sessions at his Venice apartment. An especially significant detail arose when one member of Jason's online friend group shared an audio memo he had recorded in which Jason, clearly distressed, rambled about the burden of keeping secrets that could ruin lives. In the tape, Jason's voice trembled as he admitted to feeling hunted and isolated by his own guilt. This was the first time investigators had access to something so raw, so unfiltered, that it served as both circumstantial evidence and a window into his psychological distress. The memo was passed immediately to forensic audio analysts and to the case's lead detective, who played it multiple times, parsing every word, every pause, for intent. Concurrently, the scrutiny intensified around another individual, Kenny Parker, Jason's longtime friend and recent confidant. Friends from college reported that Kenny and Jason had become nearly inseparable in the months preceding the disappearance, bonding over mutual dissatisfaction with their lives and resentment over perceived slights and failures. When police reached out to question Kenny, he denied any knowledge of the Miller's fate. But digital forensics soon revealed that he had communicated with Jason repeatedly on encrypted channels, discussing methods of fixing mistakes and covering tracks. These exchanges, coupled with Jason's unraveling digital presence, began to paint a damning picture. This was no random disappearance. Amid this technological pursuit, the members of the Miller family's charitable and cultural circles started to come forward. Some recounted interactions with Jason during fundraisers and family gatherings after the disappearance, moments marked by abrupt mood swings, nervous laughter, or almost manic attempts to steer conversations away from his parents. One friend, shaken by a peculiar encounter, remembered Jason squeezing her hand during a dinner, leaning in and whispering, "If you only knew what people are capable of when they're desperate." She had dismissed it as grief at the time, but, in retrospect, it haunted her enough to contact the detectives. Taken together, these independent tips and troubling digital artifacts breathed new urgency into an investigation that had, for weeks, run up against blanks and dead ends. Detectives, previously hampered by a lack of tangible evidence, now had a rich trove of circumstantial leads, all pointing toward the troubling possibility that something deeply sinister had unfolded within the Miller family. The online sleuth's contributions, initially dismissed as the noise of an obsessed public, had provided the critical missing pieces to a horrifying puzzle. Jason confesses and the horrifying truth emerges. After weeks of relentless investigation, media pressure, and fracturing relationships, the case reached its grim turning point on the afternoon of March 15, 2013. By this point, the combination of damning digital evidence, witness statements, and mounting psychological pressure pushed the police to intensify their direct scrutiny of Jason Miller. Quiet surveillance and numerous informal interrogations had yielded little more than nervous contradictions and emotional outbursts, but something had changed. There was a sense of inevitability hanging over every interaction. The decision to bring Jason in for a formal interview came after a pivotal conversation with his cousin. The cousin, shaken by a series of erratic, guilt-laden texts received from Jason in the midnight hours, contacted authorities and agreed to cooperate. He spoke of Jason's spiraling behavior, long, rambling calls in which Jason hinted that the world would never see the same again, and cryptic allusions to unforgivable actions. Subpoenas were issued for both his cousin's messages and Jason's phone records, which further corroborated the digital evidence already compiled by police and community sleuths alike. Inside the small, windowless interview room at LAPD's West Division, with two seasoned detectives quietly laying out their amassed file of timelines, bank transactions, and social messages, Jason realized the tangled net had finally closed. Unlike the earlier sessions, marked by deflection and half-hearted denials, this confrontation forced Jason to face not only the evidence but also the ruins of his own psyche. As tension built, Jason initially retreated into silence, his hands trembling, eyes darting to the clock, sweat seeping from his brow. But when the detectives placed photos of his parents' last hours, a transcript of his late-night gaming confessions, and a printout of his financial transactions beside him, his composure shattered. Jason broke down, hunched over the table, the weight of weeks of guilt and deception finally overpowering his resistance. Through choking sobs, broken sentences, and repeated apologies to his brother and the memory of his parents, Jason confessed to everything. The story he told left even the most hard-boiled detectives momentarily stunned. Jason recounted the days and hours leading up to the crime with excruciating detail, how the simmering resentments, financial despair, and a toxic codependency with his friend Kenny Parker escalated into a pact. Jason described feeling cornered, desperate to escape both his perceived failures and what he saw as his parents' oppressive expectations. Kenny, deeply resentful of his own lot in life and embittered by years of watching Jason struggle, was the catalyst for a plan that should never have been conceived. On that fateful Thursday morning, Jason explained, he argued with his parents under the guise of a mundane visit. Fueled by anger, jealousy, and mounting hopelessness, things rapidly escalated beyond repair. Kenny entered the scene midway through the day, lured by a series of frantic texts from Jason. A confrontation turned violent. The details, revealed by Jason piece by piece, were chilling. He and Kenny incapacitated his parents during an emotional altercation, first using sleeping pills dissolved in tea, then resorting to physical violence when their approach failed. The next hours descended into horror, planning, panic, and finally the gruesome act of attempting to dispose of the bodies inside a rented apartment in nearby Venice. With a numb, almost clinical detachment, Jason described the efforts he and Kenny made to hide their crime: cleaning, dismemberment, chemical attempts to hasten decomposition, and the feverish late-night trips to hardware stores and pharmacies. Every choice made, he now realized, unraveled then and there under the cold gaze of police detectives. The house of lies he had maintained, alibis, feigned grief, and carefully curated social media posts, had finally collapsed. Detectives, after ensuring Jason's exhaustive signed statement, wasted no time issuing warrants for Kenny Parker's apartment and vehicles. SWAT and forensic units swarmed the location, finding physical evidence horrifying in its clarity. In a refrigerated storage unit hidden beneath a pile of discarded household items, investigators discovered the remains of Stephen and Linda Miller, confirming the most sickening suspicions. Other rooms yielded bleach stains, surgical gloves, and Jason's handwritten notes mapping out their failed cover-up. The aftermath of Jason's confession left a community stunned. David Miller, devastated by the confirmation of his worst fears, withdrew from public life as press and neighbors reeled in collective disbelief. News outlets, which had once speculated endlessly about motive and possible suspects, now documented every gruesome turn of the investigation, reconstructing with morbid fascination the path from privilege to atrocity. Family, friends, counselors, and community leaders attempted to make sense of the senseless. The collapse of the picture-perfect Miller family became the dark cautionary tale haunting Westwood, the topic of whispered conversations in country clubs and block parties for years to come. Conduct on-site investigation and assess the shocking incident. As soon as Jason Miller's confession was on record, the gears of the official investigation cranked into high gear. The Los Angeles Police Department, alongside state forensics and a special task force, coordinated an immediate operation to secure and process all crime scenes implicated by Jason's testimony. Their first target, the unassuming Venice apartment belonging to Kenny Parker, the friend-turned-accomplice whose name had surfaced repeatedly in both digital footprints and Jason's harrowing narrative. Just after sunrise, a convoy of police SUVs and white forensic vans converged on the quiet, low-rise building. Neighbors peered anxiously from behind blinds as officers cordoned off the alley, unfurled yellow tape, and established a makeshift command post on the sidewalk. Armed with warrants, detectives and forensic technicians entered the apartment while photographers documented every step. The scent of strong disinfectants and chemical cleaners hit the team before the front door was even fully open, a detail that instantly set investigators on edge. The apartment was in eerie disarray. Forensic teams identified newly scrubbed spots along the hallway and in the bathroom, inconsistent with the general clutter: takeout boxes, laundry piles, and neglected dishes. Carefully following the blueprint from Jason's confession and the hastily scribbled notes found in his bag, they methodically searched floorboards, cupboards, drains, and appliances for biological traces. What they uncovered would haunt even the most seasoned officers for years to come. In the corner of the small kitchen, a battered refrigerator was wedged behind cardboard boxes and a broken chair. When investigators leveraged open the door, they discovered the remains of Stephen and Linda Miller, dismembered and concealed among bags of frozen vegetables and jugs of water to mask the smell. The sight was unspeakable, a level of brutality unthinkable in a case that had started as a high-profile missing persons investigation. The officers, though trained for horror, paused in solemn silence. A crime scene photographer steadied her hands as she captured the grim evidence. Meticulous evidence gathering commenced. Forensics collected every scrap and suspected tool: saws, heavy-duty garbage bags, multiple bottles of industrial-strength bleach, surgical gloves, and stained clothing hastily stuffed in a plastic bin. On a desk wedged beside the futon, investigators found a spiral-bound notebook annotated with a crude, almost clinical list: dosage, sleeping pills, rags, bleach, schedule, dispose, Venice location. There were diagrams and handwritten timelines matching Jason's confession. Luminol spray revealed blood traces in areas that had been obsessively scrubbed. In the bathroom, residual tissue lodged in the plumbing pointed to desperate and hurried attempts at cleanup and disposal. A search of the apartment's crawl space revealed additional bags containing personal effects: Linda Miller's monogrammed scarf, Stephen's watch, and a stack of family photos hastily torn in half. Everything reeked of anxiety and methodical panic, a failed effort to erase lives and memories, leaving only traces left behind by guilt and haste. Every inch of the apartment was processed, swabbed, and catalogued as evidence. The gravity of the crime left many officers shaken and speechless. their customary distance from tragedy breached by the sheer intimacy and enormity of the violence. Back at headquarters, detectives assembled an evidence board that now sprawled across an entire conference room wall. Color-coded lines traced the flows of money, maps pinpointed Jason and Kenny's movements, and photos from the scene created a collage of horror and heartbreak. The case's digital branch, managed by cybercrime specialists, mirrored this process by reconstructing weeks' worth of encrypted conversations, receipts, and deleted files, no detail too small to warrant scrutiny. Meanwhile, the medical examiner's team set to work at the secured crime scene, taking painstaking care to document each fragment and analyze traces left by the hasty disposal attempt. The coroner's van, arriving discreetly in the late afternoon, became a visual omen for the entire neighborhood that the rumors of tragedy had become reality. Pathologists would later testify to the extraordinary effort to conceal the crime, careful attempts to slow decomposition, calculated segmentation of remains to fit available containers, and the presence of both sleeping agents and chemical cleaners in tissue samples. The evidence was not only damning but chillingly premeditated. News of the discovery broke quickly, within hours. Live reports and helicopters circled overhead, and the Miller home in Westwood braced for a new wave of media intrusion. Community members gathered in silent vigil outside the family's gate, leaving flowers and cards as official vehicles passed. For the first time in weeks there was a grim sort of closure. Neighbors whispered, hugged, and cried, struggling to process the magnitude of loss. A storybook family destroyed in a manner few could comprehend. The shock reverberated across Los Angeles and far beyond. Talk shows, podcasts, and late-night segments dissected every detail, speculating on how a family once heralded for its unity and philanthropy could meet such a gruesome end. Some debated the role of privilege and secrecy. Others wondered at the psychology of filial resentment taken to extremes. While detectives continued their forensic sweep of both Jason's and Kenny's living spaces, they uncovered more details supportive of premeditation. Receipts for solvent and hardware purchases matched timestamps from security cameras and phone GPS records. Chemical residue found in a Venice Beach dumpster, just blocks from Kenny's apartment, was a forensic match for the substances at the crime scene. In Jason's own apartment, another cache of notes revealed sketches, lists, and psychological ramblings about freedom and failure, private rehearsals for the events he would tragically enact. The legal machinery moved rapidly. Prosecutors added charges of aggravated homicide, evidence tampering, and desecration of remains. Both Jason and Kenny were arraigned and denied bail. Their attorneys, faced with insurmountable physical and digital proof, shifted strategy from denial to damage control, exploring possibilities of diminished capacity and mental health defenses. The public, still reeling, demanded accountability and deeper examination of warning signs. Commentators highlighted missed opportunities for intervention, teachers' concerns, therapists' notes, subtle signals in social media posts that might have signaled imminent disaster but were lost in the shuffle of affluence and privacy. For the Miller family's wider circle, and the city as a whole, the discovery of Stephen and Linda brought not just heartbreak, but a profound reckoning. Their mansion, once a symbol of success, now stood as a monument to the limits of security and the fragility of facade. Every detail gleaned from the scene reinforced the disturbing reality. Beneath the veneer of order and prosperity, even the most privileged families can harbor unspeakable darkness. Revelations of the past, motives, and Jason's attempted justification. When the grim reality of the Millers' fate emerged, the ensuing investigation and trial became a deep probe into not only what happened, but why. The portrait of Jason Miller that unfolded was far more complex than mere headlines of a privileged son gone astray. The courtroom, packed with press and haunted friends, was soon flooded with psychological and biographical testimony that painted the tangled roots of Jason's descent. Expert witnesses for both prosecution and defense combed through years of family dynamics. Through statements and therapy records, the tension between achievement and affection in the Miller home became clear. Stephen and Linda, admired for their discipline and class, were also parents who wielded success like a yardstick. Every moment of Jason's life had been observed, measured, and compared. Too often he felt with his older brother David's quieter ambition and dependability as the ideal. Jason revealed in testimony that the quest for perfection suffocated him, and every accomplishment came laced with the suspicion it would never be enough. In school, Jason had once thrived as a piano prodigy, bringing pride and hope to his family in childhood. But when he reached adolescence, a string of setbacks, A hand injury ending his dreams, stumbles in college, a few late-night run-ins with the law left his confidence in tatters. Unemployment followed graduation, replaced by half-hearted gigs, failed business ventures, and a spiral into debt. His family helped, but only with conditions and reminders of their own struggles and sacrifices. Jason internalized these reminders as recrimination. He told his psychiatrist that it felt as if his parents would rather have no son at all than an imperfect one. The Millers' love, it turned out, was never unconditional in Jason's mind. They measured everything, our grades, our habits, our worth, Jason later wrote in a letter never sent. As David's career soared, Jason withdrew further, oscillating between resentment and shame. Sibling rivalry turned caustic. David, though never hostile, seemed to fulfill every dream Jason believed he had failed, and their parents' subtle favoritism, even a glance or a sigh, compounded Jason's sense of inadequacy. Jason's desperate need for approval left him vulnerable to influence from others who shared his sense of frustration. Chief among them was Kenny Parker, a troubled and deeply resentful former classmate. Testimony and digital records showed that Kenny grew up under harsher circumstances, with an abusive father and years bouncing between foster homes. Kenny, too, had failed in various ventures, clashing with authority and craving a sense of belonging. Their friendship, forged at a moment of mutual instability, deepened into a toxic pact. Kenny encouraged Jason's worst instincts, fueling paranoia and stoking grievances about parental control, fate, and the perceived hypocrisy of the upper class. In his defense, Jason spoke of feeling cornered by a lifetime of expectations, and manipulated by Kenny's nihilistic philosophy. Texts and emails considered in court revealed hours of late-night conversation, some drunken, some despairing, discussing the pointlessness of their own existence, and plots to escape parental domination. Prosecutors painted these exchanges as premeditation. The defense depicted them as the ramblings of two desperate, depressed men unable to see a future for themselves. Throughout the trial, Jason's lawyers leaned heavily on his fragile mental health. Psychiatric evaluations revealed a pattern of crippling depression, anxiety, and a borderline personality disorder, but experts for the prosecution argued that Jason and Kenny both made multiple calculated decisions in the lead-up to and aftermath of the murders. The attempt to cover their tracks, they said, betrayed an awareness of guilt and a capacity for self-control. On the stand, Jason alternated between anger, remorse, and melodramatic appeals for understanding. He described his actions as a horrible, desperate mistake, not a cold-blooded act of evil. He cited years of therapy, prescriptions, failed interventions, and a desire just once to be seen, as I really am, not just the disappointment or the experiment that failed. Kenny, in his brief appearance, expressed mainly detachment and bitterness, blaming a society and family structures that never gave us a real chance. But for all the exploration of trauma and dysfunction, neither the court nor the public could ignore the deliberate choices, the horrifying results, and the aching losses left behind. Psychologists called to testify reminded jurors that motive may help explain, but not excuse, acts so extreme. Jason's defenders urged compassion, but even in their empathy, the enormity of his actions and the shadow cast over his family remained inescapable. The trial that shocked a nation and the questions it left for America. The trial of Jason Miller and Kenny Parker began with unprecedented public attention, quickly transforming from a local tragedy into national spectacle. The courtroom, typically an austere arena for legal proceedings, became the stage for an American reckoning, one in which themes of privilege, parental expectations, mental health, and the relentless pressures of modern society were all dissected with relentless scrutiny. Media crews camped outside the courthouse each day, filling screens across the country with images of the Miller family's remaining members, legal teams, and rows of somber-faced jurors. Inside the courtroom, the mood was electric. Journalists sat shoulder to shoulder, legal scholars scribbled notes for future think pieces, and a procession of expert witnesses waited nervously in the wings. The prosecution meticulously presented the chain of digital forensic and testimonial evidence, methodically outlining every step: Jason's spiraling debt, cryptic online messages, psychological friction with his parents, and the fateful collaboration with Kenny. Photos from the Venice crime scene and chilling recorded confessions were played for a jury that sat white-knuckled through hours of testimony. At the center of it all stood Jason, pale and gaunt, rarely meeting anyone's gaze. His defense, coordinated by a team of high-profile attorneys, leaned hard into the narrative of psychological dysfunction, a story of an emotionally neglected son crumbling under the weight of great expectations and unprocessed trauma. Mental health experts were called to the stand, offering nuanced but at times contested appraisals. Diagnoses ranged from major depressive disorder to post-traumatic stress, even to psychotic breaks triggered by mounting stressors. Jason's diary entries and art therapy sketches were submitted as evidence, raw expressions of alienation, rage, and desperate yearning for approval, their sincerity both undeniable and unsettling. Kenny Parker's own trial ran parallel, though his defense was less elaborate. His attorney argued that he had acted not out of premeditated malice but as a bystander swept up by Jason's emotional breakdown, his involvement more panicked complicity than willful villainy. Yet forensic timelines and financial records painted a different picture, implicating Kenny as active architect in the cover-up and disposal, a grim echo of friendship gone dangerously awry. The testimony of David Miller, the surviving brother, rang out as perhaps the trial's most devastating moment. Emotionally spent but resolute, David described the illusion of perfection his family had maintained for decades, and openly grappled with his own guilt at not seeing the warning signs. Social workers and family therapists were questioned about the realities of high-achieving families. Academic experts debated how success and secrecy often mask dysfunction, while true crime pundits bickered about the American dream turned nightmare. By the trial's midpoint, American society had adopted the saga as a mirror for its own anxieties. Op-eds erupted about helicopter parenting, the loneliness of affluence, and how stigma frequently silences the mentally ill until it's too late. Live streams of the proceedings were dissected in real time on podcasts and morning television, fueling fierce debates about justice, empathy, and the role of privilege in both crime and punishment. When the verdict was finally read in early 2015, the courtroom was plunged into a silence broken only by the judge's steady voice. Jason Miller was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Kenny Parker received 10 years for his role in concealing the crime. No one left the courthouse feeling satisfied, least of all the Miller family's surviving friends, who scattered quietly to process a loss that no sentence could truly resolve. In the months and years following, the case left deep scars across the landscape of American culture. Lawmakers debated new interventions for mental health in affluent neighborhoods. Advocacy groups lobbied for more proactive support networks in both schools and social communities, but beneath every headline and school assembly remained the inescapable question: how could a family with so much go so horrifyingly, fatally wrong? Parents, teachers, and children across the country pondered, with newfound urgency, what lurks behind the closed doors of America's perfect homes, and whether the next tragedy could be theirs.